Bella Flores Santos. She is married to our godson, JP, who interviewed Mom and wrote her story. Thank you, Bella. She's the daughter of Jan and Willie Flores. This is Mom's rendition of her time during the march and here in Manenggon, and ended up in Agana, and then of course Sinahunya, where we were raised. I was 7 months pregnant and had a 10-month-old infant when we were told we had to leave Chico. My family was originally from Agana, but we have moved up to Chico during the war. I was sheltered from much of the horrors of the war while in Chico, but I did hear about forced labor, torture, executions, and rapes. I've been hearing from the people around me that the general feeling was the Americans would be coming soon. I didn't know how soon the Japanese occupation would end, but I remember as we heard more about the Americans, the Japanese were getting edgy and nervous. In July of 1944, the Japanese military ordered all the Chamorros to be rounded up and marched to different sites around the island. So my family was told to leave our ranch in Jigo. It was early in the morning that we headed to Maimai. We were told by the Japanese that we were being taken for protection. We reached Maimai in the evening and we spent the night. We had only the clothes on our back. We left Jigo so quickly that we didn't have time to gather any supplies. We took some food, but it wasn't even enough for one meal for our family. The next morning, there was gunfire close enough. We could smell it and could actually hear the sound of gunfire and the bullets whizzing by. We could tell the Japanese were nervous and obviously angry by their mannerisms and tones of voice. Hoping we would be released to Chico, we were instead rounded up again. I don't remember the exact time, but I remember clearly the different emotions of anger, fear, despair, and concern when news of executions and beheadings were spreading through Maimai. We left Maimai and headed towards Manenggon. On the way, we met up with others walking from Pigo and Adilope, and it looked like a river of people. Everyone was weeping and crying, trying to encourage each other and warn each other not to fall behind or they would be beaten by the Japanese. The news of executions, beatings, and deaths were rampant on our march. I had just heard about Auntie Bella and some others, parts of his family, that were tortured and taken to Maimai and Hawaii. On our way to Manenggon, we could see the American planes shooting and dive-bombing Japanese targets, and the soldiers began to use people as human shields. We were afraid for our lives. My feet were so swollen and I was in great pain, but my only thoughts were to protect my unborn baby and stay alive. For my other baby, Rosie, who was hungry, thirsty, and feverish. Rosie was only 10 months old, and she was skin and bones. My cousins and nephews took turns carrying and cradling Rosie because no one dared to stop fear of being beaten. I didn't see it for myself, but some of my relatives saw people beaten, so they protected Rosie and me, refusing to stop or rest for fear of being punished or worse. We couldn't even stop to find food. We reached Manenggon in the afternoon. There were already countless people around us, and more were marching in. We found a clear spot, which was bare ground, but surrounded enough that we could hide from gunfire. It seemed like an endless stream of Chamorros were being herded into camp since the day we arrived. We were told about a group of men from Agad, forced by the Japanese to march towards Manenggon. carrying supplies and arms. They were never heard of again. After a few days at Manenggon, the news spread through the camp that the Americans had landed and they would soon defeat the Japanese. When the rumor began, boys and men were being rounded up to carry munitions and supplies to the Japanese up north. I recognized some of these men from Jigo. I heard later that they were tied up and beheaded in Matapua. It was so disturbing because I remember seeing them leaving and being told they probably wouldn't return. I don't remember how long I was in Manenggon, maybe 2 or 3 weeks. I was just so focused on my babies. It was difficult to protect myself and my baby because we had no shelter, no clothes, nothing. But I was in a survival mode even though everything seemed so hopeless. Then I thought I may never leave Manenggon alive. When I was told, Hannah Chance, my first cousin, died. People in the camp share what little food we had from scrounging around and limited foraging since we were not allowed to leave the camp. We drank water straight from the river since we weren't allowed to start fires, even to boil water for drinking. Most people slept on the bare ground, but some like me slept on coconut leaves. Sometimes people didn't wake from their sleep because of injuries or sickness, or sometimes I thought because of heartache and stress. One amazing thing about my experience in Manenggon is that I never saw a single Japanese soldier when I was there. I knew they were there because family and friends who tried to isolate me told me. I saw the results, though, the suffering, injuries, and death. I saw the machine guns placed in the middle of the camp, aimed at all of us. We finally heard good news. Man makkoy Amerikano, man daigi esta. People moved quickly and excitedly. A day or two after I heard this, the Americans had arrived. We started marching again, though this time towards Sumay. On the way we heard the gunfire on the other side of the ridge at the concentration camp. I heard the Japanese had scattered, but a lot of Chamorros were caught in the crossfire. We were told to march and march swiftly. Again, maybe because I was so focused on my unborn baby and Rosie, I never saw an American soldier. We crossed several hills and valleys, ending up at Manenggon, where they were already Chamorros. I didn't see any soldiers. I knew they were there, though, because people were talking. We were at Tembu for 2 days, and I remember watching more and more people coming through. While most came from Manenggon, some came from other sides, including Asinan. The third day, we headed to Pigo, and that's when I first saw the American soldiers. That walk took most of the day. There were so many dead bodies, and the smell was overwhelming. We passed body after body in various states of decomposition. Some were just body parts that were blown up. Something that had struck with me is that since the day we started marching from Jigo to when we ended up in Pigo, people were quiet. Some were crying, refusing to be comforted, but it was quiet, too quiet for people used to socializing, laughing, and singing. It was so unusual and out of place. When we entered Pigo, the cemetery had been bulldozed to create a mass grave for the Japanese dead. We saw hands, feet, body parts protruding from the soil. It sickened us. But we continued walking. There were so many giant worms and maggots. I had never seen maggots so big. It looked like a moving mass of life whenever they were gathered. We saw so many Japanese bodies in the river, and when we crossed the Ponte River, we camped next to the old retaining wall. American soldiers were everywhere. They gave us canned food to eat. We still drank from the river, the same river with all the dead bodies. It was amazing no one got sick. Maybe this was because we had a chance to boil our water, not like before. I I felt better after the meal, but there was still Rosie to look after. I was with my in-laws in Nigeria and Tito's Wheel. Tito had a boat and managed to survive the whole ordeal. I couldn't produce any breast milk due to stress and my state of weakness, so I was never able to feed Rosie. Nigeria found a mamador and was able to milk the goat for food for Rosie. And Bella does not include this because my mother told me the lady that was here with them started a fire to warm up my milk, and because that was not allowed, she and some family members were tortured and beaten for that, and I just met the family today. Thank you, Auntie Rose and Ifambiamo. Despite the poor living conditions of people were so happy. We were relieved the war was finally over. Everywhere I looked, there were tears and quiet reflection in the eyes of those who finally reached government, reuniting with lost family members or accepting the awful realization that others had died. Some never found. I don't even know where my mother ended up. She was buried in a mass grave in Sumay, so I've heard. 2 weeks in Pigo, I gave birth to Hilda. I remember the maggots all around me while I was in labor. I was scared, but my baby was fine. After camp broke, we went to Hagatna to stay with my in-laws, the Imperial Kamatsuan family, whose house remained relatively unscathed. As the life slowly returned to normal, I looked to the future, but I buried these memories deep inside. And I have a feeling that's why my mom's not here today. She just could not come. So, the thing that will stay with me today are the dead babies. All through the march, no one was really talking. Babies were dying in their loved ones' arms because they weren't allowed to be cared for. Imagine that. Babies dying in parents, siblings, or relatives, refusing to leave them. They were hanging on to babies who had been dead for days, but they refused to let go. They were praying for some sort of miracle. Those memories will forever haunt me. But I'll also remember the joy and the happiness of being reunited with my family from all over Guam. I'll always remember the joy of liberation. Thank you.